This is, as JP said, the first time Schumacher Lectures have been in New York City. This is the 30th year of the Schumacher Lectures, and we're very happy today to be able to present Gus Speth, Neva Goodwin, and Stuart Wallace in a rich, I think, expanse of understanding of what we must move toward in a new economy. The New Economics Institute is working to help show the way in the U.S. Toward an economics that supports both people and the planet. Our current economic system is failing, and its essential purpose should be to provide fulfilling, healthy lives for all people while nurturing the social and natural systems on which economic systems depend. That's not what we're seeing today, as we'll see throughout this day, but there are paths towards moving in that direction. The further purpose of the New Economics Institute is, in fact, to develop research and help implement systematic solutions to a series of systemic problems humanity now faces. We all have seen the litany of those challenges, but just to be clear, what the New Economics Institute really wants to focus on in its systematic understanding and hopefully application of solutions relate to what we'll call the sustainability, climate, and dwindling resources crisis, the equality crisis both here and around the world in terms of income, assets, access, and also democracy, the financial risk crisis with a system that is neither efficient nor resilient, and the well-being crisis, in which rising income is not translating into rising happiness. And this may, in fact, be one of the biggest levers we have today. Many and various solutions to these various kinds of crises are emerging, but the solutions are typically not thought of in a systemic way, nor are the solutions being pulled together into a compelling and coherent narrative, the story that gives us a sense of what might be possible. The task of the New Economics Institute is to provide this narrative, as well as the missing intellectual support for major system change, to collect and link together solutions that are now emerging, and when those solutions are not now emerging, to define and provide direction where we might be able to see them emerge. The New Economics Institute is not a new organization, as JP mentioned. We're a transition of the 30-year E.F. Schumacher Society, which has been a mainstay of advancing Fritz Schumacher's work of 40 years ago, expressed in Small is Beautiful, Economics as if People Mattered. Today, New Economics Institute has created a new board, a new mission, a new focus. We've moved our lectures to New York City. This is all part of our strategy to try to open up the conversation that Schumacher Society has done such a good job with in terms of the localized economy. We now need to broaden that to a broader sphere. We're also very fortunate that the New Economics Institute has a brethren organization, the New Economics Foundation out of London. It's the largest independent economic think and do tank in Europe, and over 25 years it has demonstrated both strategies, analysis, and examples of how we in fact can transition to an economy that can serve us all and can demonstrate the path towards sustainability. The New Economics Institute strategy is really one of collaboration. There are these compost piles and organic gardens of new economic activity emerging all over the country. There's important organizations, and this is the good news. It really is a diffused process. One of our jobs is to help create a narrative and a focus for the aggregation of those organizations into one voice, into one belief system about how we can change things. Today, we are blessed to have an array of co-sponsors: American Sustainable Business Council, Berkshire's, Brooklyn Torch Project, Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, Capital Institute, Confluence Philanthropy, Center for the Advancement of Steady State Economy, David Suzuki Foundation, Ethical Markets Media, Friends of the Earth, Garrison Institute, Global Development and Environment Institute, Gund Institute for Ecological Economics, Cosmos Journal, the Land Institute, New Economy Network, Ocean Arcs International, Other Worlds, Robert Salkenbach Foundation, Sustainable South Bronx, Tikkun, Westport Village Green Initiative, and our Olive Branch. Now on to our first speaker. Gus Speth is one of America's most influential environmental activists. He has helped shape the environmental movement for 40 years through his active role in national and international environmental organizations and as an advisor to U.S. and world leaders. In 1970, Gus co-founded the Natural Resources Defense Council. He was chair of the U.S. Council on Environmental Quality and helped develop Jimmy Carter's environmental policies. In 1982, he founded and was president of the World Resources Institute, and from 1993 to 1999, Gus administered the United Nations Development Program. Gus currently serves on the boards of the New Economics Institute, New Economy Network, Natural Resources Defense Council, World Resources Institute, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, One Sky, and Institute for Sustainable Communities. Those are just some of the organizations that are part of this sort of new economics matrix. As a distinguished graduate from Yale School of Law and a Rhodes Scholar, Gus taught environmental and constitutional law at Georgetown Law School and served as the dean of the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies until his retirement in 2009. Best of all, in 2010, Gus joined the faculty of the Vermont Law School, and he and his wife, Cameron, moved to Stratford, Vermont. This is best because Vermont now can benefit from his wisdom, leadership, and unique skills as an entrepreneurial change agent, as we in Vermont try to figure out how to help build our own bridge to sustainability. With that, Gus.
Well, thank you so much, Will, for that. Will and I share many things, but one of them that he didn't stress was that we are both from Vermont now, and I want you to know that that compost recommendation reference that he made wasn't just accidental. He's busily covering the whole Champlain Valley with a gigantic organic farm and carrying out other important initiatives in my new adopted state. I'll try to be on time. I've got my watch here in front of me. I didn't have it one time when I was speaking at Yale, and I ran over badly, and I apologized to the students, and one of them stood up and said, "It's okay, Dean Speth, there's a calendar on the wall behind you." I have to thank the New Economics Institute and Susan Witt in particular for this opportunity. Over the years, with Susan's leadership, these lectures have opened many a new horizon, pointing the way to a better world, and I'm proud to be part of this effort and proud to be speaking today along with Neva Goodwin and Stuart Wallace. I want to talk with you today about liberalism, environmentalism, and economic growth. And many of us, I think, bestride this uneasy gap that separates American liberalism and American environmentalism. We have a foot in both of the camps, and if we were asked by a pollster, we would say yes, liberal, and we would say yes, environmentalist. And progressive souls in the Congress generally support both causes eagerly. The Black Caucus is one of the strongest environmental voting records in the Congress today. But between the people in the Congress, there are organized groups advocating for the two causes. And these organizations generally, I hate to say it, but generally go their own separate ways. And I think that's true generally of the progressive community in general. We're all in our silos. And there's much less siloing on the right, where the typical think tank or the typical advocacy group will cover everything from stripping EPA of its power to address climate change to ensuring that the rich are minimally taxed. And I think they have something to teach us. So today I want to argue that the walls separating liberals and environmentalists must be breached, that to win there must be a fusion of progressive causes, that we've got to forge a common agenda, and that together we've got to build a mighty force on the ground at the grassroots. I think this progressive fusion is essential, first of all, because we're stronger if we support each other. We're better together. And that should be enough of a reason, given the formidable forces that we face today, forces that certainly were made stronger by the recent midterm elections in the United States. But there are other and deeper realities to consider beyond mere alliance that force us together, I think. For their part, environmentalists are slowly coming to see that real progress on environmental issues is going to remain elusive unless the liberal agenda of social justice and political reform is steadily realized. In a land of pervasive economic insecurity like ours and stark inequality, American environmentalists are going to keep losing. In such a land, the economic will continue to trump the environmental. And environmentalists will continue to live in a strange place where they can save the planet only if it helps the economy. In a similar way, environmentalists are going to keep losing if American politics stays like it is today. To point to just one indicator, the influence industry in Washington today spends over $6 billion a year and employs more than 35,000 lobbyists. And that data was from a few years ago, actually. We face a disheartening quandary. The profit-maximizing corporations dominate the economy. The only obvious counterweight is government, and yet government is dominated by the same corporations. So environmentalists need for liberals to succeed. But what about the opposite? Do liberal groups that fight for social justice and political improvements need for environmentalists to succeed? And here I think the answer is also yes. For example, environmental success on climate and energy would usher in an era of green job growth, and also the new rights-based approach to environmental protection is embracing liberal themes like climate justice and the right to food, the right to water, the right to cultural survival, and much more. But I'd actually like to stress a deeper relationship, a deeper way of looking at the liberal stake in environmental success. Consider a world first in which environmentalists continue to lose on the big issues like climate change. Many of our most insightful observers today see current trends taking us to some type of a collapse or a catastrophe or a breakdown in our society. And they see climate change and other environmental crises as leading ingredients in a devil's brew that also includes such stresses as population pressures, peak oil, energy supply problems, economic and political stabilities, global income disparities, terrorism, failed states, nuclear proliferation. A world of environmental failure would be an increasingly nasty place. A world where environmentalists fail is a world of food and water shortages, of sea level rise, increasing heat waves and fires, floods, storms, and droughts, and other so-called natural disasters, deforestation and desertification and biotic impoverishment, pollution and toxification, energy shortages, and other unpleasant surprises. This is not a world where the concerns of the poor and the powerless, or even the average Joe, are likely to fare well. And politics in such a world could move in very unfortunate directions. For example, some who have constructed scenarios of the future see a continuation of business as usual, staying on the same path that we're on now, as leading us to a fortress world. For example, here's how Paul Raskin and his colleagues at the TELUS Institute describe a fortress world. And it's described here in global terms, but it could happen at any level, anywhere. The global economy spawns a new class of internationally connected affluent, but there's a counterpoint, the billions of desperately poor, whose boats fail to rise with the general economic tide. Meanwhile, environmental conditions deteriorate, multiple stresses, pollution, climate change, ecosystem degradation, interact and amplify the growing crisis. Disputes over scarce water resources feed conflict in regions with shared water basins. In this atmosphere of deepening social and environmental crisis, conflict feeds off of old ethnic, religious, and nationalistic tensions. The affluent minority fears that it too will be engulfed by rampant migration and violence and the spreads of diseases. So a world of global dualism, some call it a fortress world, emerges from the crisis. The separate spheres of haves and have-nots, the included and the excluded, are codified in asymmetrical and authoritarian legal and institutional frameworks. The affluent live in protected enclaves in the rich nations and strongholds in the poor nations, bubbles of privilege amidst a sea of misery, and the police state outside the fortress where the majority are mired in poverty and denied basic freedoms. In a similar way, my friend Clive Hamilton reports on a conference in 2009 of climate experts at Oxford, where the question came up, can we continue to gamble with democracy? Some thought that slashing emissions would require much less democracy and something akin to a tyranny, benevolent or otherwise. In recent years, we know that military experts and others have warned repeatedly that climate disruption could lead to humanitarian emergencies, climate refugees, conflicts over water and other resources, failed states, extreme north-south tensions, and any number of other threats to international security and stability. A new book, Climate Wars, just came out. Of course, there's a lot of speculation in all of these musings about what the future might hold for us, but at a minimum, I think we can conclude that the liberal program, the liberal agenda of democracy and peace and rights, political rights, and dealing with our social issues, that this agenda is threatened by unfolding climate and other environmental trends. We know that in times of great stress and loss and instability, societies can tend to illiberal answers. And liberals need to appreciate how serious and near-term environmental threats actually are, and also what is threatened. Political and social systems are threatened, not just ecological ones. And I think liberals, and indeed all of us, need to recognize that these environmental threats are much too serious to leave to the environmentalist. There's another line of inquiry, I think, that points to the need for this greening of liberalism. This area is opened up not by thinking about a world of environmental failure, but by thinking about the requirements for environment's success. Ideas are coming forward today from cutting-edge environmentalism that offer the potential to strengthen the liberal agenda. And at the same time, environmental analysis these days is pointing to some novel policy prescriptions that are definitely at odds with prescriptions regularly urged by American liberals. So I believe in both of these areas, the liberal community, the environmental community has something to offer to liberalism. The most important area where this latest environmental thinking conflicts with the current liberal agenda is on the issue of economic growth. Over the years, I've read many books by our leading liberals, most recently Bob Reich's Aftershock, and I attend daily to the excellent online liberal news and opinion summary, the Campaign for America's Future, and I read The Nation and the American Prospect, and I admire what they're doing and feel that I'm part of that liberalism. So I know that American liberals tend to be strong advocates of economic growth. Indeed, the way the growth issue is perceived in Washington today, those fighting those battles in Washington today have little choice but to adhere to this growth mantra. But a growing number of environmental thinkers are urging a different perspective. They see, and indeed I see, a world where past growth has brought us to a perilous state environmentally, where we are poised for unprecedented increments in growth, where this growth is proceeding with wildly wrong market signals and without needed constraints, and where a failed politics has not meaningfully corrected the economy's obliviousness to environmental needs. In his book, Prosperity Without Growth, a leading British economist, Tim Jackson, frames the growth issue this way. During the period since 1950, he writes, the global economy has grown more than 5 times. The size of the world economy could double and then double again by mid-century. This extraordinary ramping up of global economic activity has no historical precedent, is totally at odds with our scientific knowledge of the finite resource base and the fragile ecology on which we depend for survival, a world in which things simply go on as usual is already inconceivable. And he concludes, in short, we have no alternative but to question growth. In this regard, the existential issue of global warming and climate disruption is particularly worrying. Many analysts have concluded that it will probably be impossible to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at required rates in the context of even moderate economic growth. The needed rates for reducing the carbon intensity of economic output are simply too high in an economy that's growing at a significant rate. In The Bridge at the Edge of the World, I indicated that to reduce U.S. carbon emissions by 80% between now and 2050, the carbon intensity of production in our country would have to decline by 7% a year, every year, for 40 years, if the U.S. economy is growing at a modest rate of 3% a year. That's a huge transformational shift. It involves wringing carbon out of a fairly rapidly growing economy at a phenomenal rate. A European analysis notes that the International Energy Agency optimistically assumes that it's technically feasible to reduce global carbon intensity by 3.5% a year. That's half of the rate of change that I just noted for the U.S. Using that assumption, it showed that to hold greenhouse gas concentrations at 450 parts per million by 2050, global per capita income could only grow at about 1% a year, which is half the current rate. And even assuming that this 450 parts per million cap by 2050 is the right one, and many climate scientists think that it's too lax, the growth rates in the industrial world would thus have to be near zero if there's going to be growing room to be left for the developing world. The New Economics Foundation in London, our sister organization, which has contributed so much to this new economic thinking, recently completed a thorough overview of whether climate goals can be met in the context of growth. And the study is entitled, Growth Isn't Possible. And that's an appropriate title given the conclusions that they came to. In the end, the New Economics Foundation quotes favorably this conclusion: economic growth in the OECD cannot be reconciled with a 2 or a 3 or even a 4 degree ceiling on global average warming. Well, we should be able to solve this puzzle, though. In his book, Managing Without Growth, Canadian economist Peter Victor presents a model of the Canadian economy that shows that it's possible to develop scenarios over a 30-year time horizon for Canada in which full employment prevails, poverty is essentially eliminated, people enjoy more leisure, greenhouse gas emissions are dramatically reduced, and the level of government indebtedness declines, all in the context of low and then no growth. And the New Economics Foundation has an ambitious effort underway now to expand on this work. So we have this difference between liberals and environmentalists on economic growth. And it's important that we move soon to resolve it. And so an important question is to ask, is it possible to craft a common platform, a common agenda among environmentalists and liberals? And is it possible that such a platform might contribute to the challenge recently laid down by liberal thinker Mark Schmidt to forge a persuasive alternative vision for the U.S. economy, he says. He says it's time to get the idea machines cranked up. What we're looking for now aren't political answers or incremental reforms or bargaining chips. We need clarity about just how different the economy will be, even after the recession ends, and a strategy for how we can, once again, make sure that the vast majority of people have a place in it. So can we forge a common agenda between environmentalists and liberals? Can we rise to this challenge that Mark Schmidt has given us? Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So let me offer for your consideration the first draft of such a platform, such an agenda of progressive fusion. And you be the judge. And for the sake of time, I'm going to concentrate almost exclusively on domestic and not foreign affairs. The platform begins by acknowledging that today's economy and our system of political economy is failing our country. It's a failure that reaches many spheres of national life: economic, social, political, environmental. Indeed, our country can be said to be in crisis in each of these four areas. The economic crisis of this great recession that we're experiencing now, a social crisis of extreme and growing inequality that's been unraveling America's social fabric for several decades. A tiny minority have experienced soaring incomes and accumulated grand fortunes, while the wages for working people have stagnated despite rising productivity gains. Poverty has risen to a 30-year high. Social mobility has declined. The middle class is disappearing. Our schools are failing. The prison populations are swelling. And employment security seems a thing of the past. An environmental crisis, which we all are acutely aware of, and a political crisis, and that crisis reflected in a governmental paralysis and a democracy that's really quite weak and shallow and corrupted, as Bob Kaiser's book says, by so damn much money. And to seek something new and better then, to move beyond these four crises, the place to start is to ask why today's system of political economy is failing so broadly. And the answer, I think, is that key features of this system work together to produce a reality that's highly destructive. The growth imperative, the profit motive, markets that systematically fail to recognize externalized social and environmental costs unless corrected by government, but government that is itself beholden to corporate interest and thus not strongly inclined to curb corporate abuses, and a rampant consumerism spurred on by endless advertising. All of these combine to deliver an ever-growing economy that's insensitive to the needs of people and place and planet. For the most part, we've lived and worked within this current system of political economy, but I think we're seeing now that working within the system is not going to succeed in the end when what we need to be doing is transforming the system itself. The big environmental and social challenges we face are not going to yield in the end to a problem-solving type of incrementalism. Progressives have gone down this path of incremental reform for decades, and we've learned that it's not enough. So we need to reinvent the economy, not merely restore it. The roots of our environmental and social problems are systemic and require transformational change. They require the shift to a new economy, a sustaining economy, based on new economic thinking and driven forward by a new politics. Sustaining people, communities, and nature have got to be henceforth seen as the core goals of economic activity, not some hoped-for byproduct of market success and growth for its own sake and modest regulatory interventions. So this is the paradigm change that we seek, the shift to a sustaining economy. Today, we have a reigning policy orientation that holds that the path to greater well-being is to grow and expand the economy. Productivity, profits, stock market, consumption have all got to go up. And this growth imperative trumps everything else. It can undermine our families, our jobs, our communities, the environment, our sense of place, our continuity in life, because it's confidently asserted and, in fact, widely believed that growth is worth the price that has to be paid for it. But an expanding body of evidence is telling us to think again. Economic growth may be the world's secular religion, but for most of the world, it is a God that is failing, underperforming for billions of the world's people, and for those of us in the rich, affluent societies, now creating more problems than it's solving. As Herman Daly and others have pointed out, we've entered an era of uneconomic growth. The never-ending drive to grow the overall U.S. economy hollows out our communities and the environment. It fuels a ruthless international search for energy and other resources. It fails at generating the jobs that we need at home, and it rests on a manufactured consumerism that's not meeting the deepest human needs. Americans are substituting growth and consumption for dealing with the real issues, for doing the things that would truly make us better off. And psychologists have pointed out that while economic output per person in the United States has risen sharply in recent decades, there's been no increase in life satisfaction, and levels of distrust and depression have in fact increased. So it's time, I think, for our country to move to a post-growth society where working life, the natural environment, our communities and families, and the public sector are no longer sacrificed for the sake of mere GDP growth, where the illusory promises of ever more growth no longer provide an excuse for neglecting to deal generously with our country's compelling social needs. How many times have we heard, if we don't keep growing, we'll have to deal with the redistribution problem in our country? We have had a lot of growth, and we have not dealt with the redistribution problem in our country, and it needs to be addressed. Of course, it's clear, however, that there are a lot of things that do need to grow, even in a post-growth America. We need to grow good jobs, the incomes of the poor and the working Americans. We need to grow the availability of health care, the efficiency of its delivery, growth in education and research and training, growth in security against the risks of illness and job loss and old age and disability, growth in investments in public infrastructure and environmental protection and amenity and restoration, growth in the deployment of climate-friendly and other green technologies, growth in the restoration of both ecosystems and local communities. These are all areas where public policy needs to ensure that we grow. I put jobs and meaningful work at the top of this list because it's so important and unemployment is so devastating. We should be striving in the United States today to add 500,000 jobs a month if we're going to put our people back to work. But likely future rates of overall economic growth, say 3% a year, are only mildly associated with declining unemployment rates. The availability of jobs, the well-being of people, the health of our communities should not be forced to await the day when overall economic growth might get around to delivering them. It's time to shed the view that government mainly provides safety nets and an occasional Keynesian stimuli. We must insist that government have an affirmative responsibility to ensure that those seeking decent paying jobs find them. And the surest and most cost-effective way to that end is direct government spending, investments, and incentives targeted at creating jobs in areas of high social benefit, and creating new jobs in areas of democratically determined priority is certainly better than trying to create jobs by pump priming aggregate economic growth, especially in an era where the macho thing to do in so much of business is to shed jobs, not to create them. There's nothing second-rate about employment of this type. I want to call your attention particularly to a set of policies that are central, it seems to me, to this new economy. Policies that will slow GDP growth, thus sparing the environment, while at the same time simultaneously improving our social and environmental well-being. Such policies exist. Shorter work weeks and longer vacations with more time for your children and families, greater labor protections and job security and benefits, including generous parental leaves, guarantees to part-time workers, restrictions on advertising, a new design for the 21st century corporation, one that embraces rechartering and new ownership patterns and stakeholder primacy rather than shareholder primacy, incentives for local and locally owned production and consumption, strong social and environmental provisions in trade agreements, rigorous environmental health and consumer protection, including full incorporation of environmental and social costs into prices, greater economic and social equality with a really true progressive taxation of the rich, and greater income support for the poor, heavy spending on neglected public services, and initiatives to address population growth at home and abroad. You take this agenda together, these policies are going to undoubtedly slow GDP growth, but well-being and quality of life will improve, and that's what really matters. Beyond policy change, another hopeful path into a sustainable and just future is to seed the landscape with innovative models. I think one of the most remarkable and yet under-noticed things going on in the United States today is the proliferation of innovative models of local living economies, sustainable communities and transition towns, for-benefit businesses which prioritize community and environment over profit and growth. The community-owned Evergreen Cooperative in Cleveland is a wonderful case in point. State and federal programs can be crafted to support community development and finance corporations, local banks, community land trust, employee and consumer ownership, local currencies and time dollars, municipal enterprise and nonprofits operating businesses. All of these things can be encouraged with appropriate state and federal programs. Well, running parallel to these changes in policy, I submit has got to be a change in national values. And in particular, it's time to move beyond our runaway consumerism and our hyperventilating lifestyles. There are certainly mounting environmental and social costs to American affluence and extravagance and wastefulness. Even our larger homes and our gigantic lots on which they sit today are too small to contain all the stuff we are accumulating. The self-storage industry didn't begin until the early 1970s, but it's grown so rapidly that its floor space would now cover the entire island of Manhattan and city of San Francisco combined. Well, the good news is that more and more people sense at some level that there's a great misdirection of life's energy. We know that we're sliding to things that truly make life worthwhile. In one survey, 81% of Americans said that the country was too focused on shopping and spending, and 88% said that society is too materialistic. And psychological studies show that this materialism is toxic to happiness, that more income and more possessions don't lead to lasting gains in our sense of well-being or satisfaction with life, and that really what does make people happy is warm interpersonal relationships and giving rather than getting. So here was a revolutionary new product that tried to make it on the marketplace. Nothing. Nothing guaranteed not to put you in debt, 100% non-toxic, sweatshop free, zero waste, doesn't contribute to global warming, family friendly, fun and creative. There were actually young women who went into the malls and tried to sell nothing, and when they were asked to leave, they refused, and they were promptly arrested. The transformation in today's economy obviously requires strong and effective government action. Inevitably, then, this drive for transformative change that we're discussing leads to the political arena, where we need a vital and muscular democracy steered by an informed and engaged citizenry. Yet, for Americans merely to state the matter this way suggests the enormity of the challenge. The ascendancy of this market fundamentalism and this anti-regulation, anti-government ideology has been particularly frightening. But even the passing of these extreme ideas would still leave deeper and more long-term deficiencies. So just as we need a new economy, we need a new politics. There are a lot of reasons why government in Washington today is more problem than solution. It's hooked on GDP growth, is heavily influenced by the same corporations and concentrations of wealth that should be seeking to regulate and to revamp. And it's hobbled by an array of dysfunctional institutional arrangements, beginning with the way presidents are elected, elections are funded, and congressional voting occurs. The House passed over 400 pieces of legislation that never made it through our Senate thanks to this insane anti-democratic Rule 22 and the way it's implemented in the Senate. Building the strength for needed change requires, first of all, a political fusion among progressives. And that fusion should start with a unified agenda. As I've stressed, that agenda would embrace a profound commitment to social justice and to environmental protection, a sustained challenge to consumerism and commercialism and the lifestyles they offer, a healthy skepticism to growth mania, and a democratic redefinition of what society should be striving to grow. A challenge to corporate dominance and a redefinition of the corporation and its goals. A commitment to an array of pro-democracy reforms in campaign finance and elections and the regulation of lobbying and much more. A common agenda would also include an ambitious set of new national indicators beyond GDP to inform us of the true quality of life in America. GDP is, in fact, a perfectly terrible measure of national well-being and progress. And because we tend to get what we measure, we should measure what we want. So, thus endeth the modest effort at a platform. That's my contribution to that. How good is it at uniting environmentalists and liberals and other progressive constituencies? Well, I would guess that everyone would agree that some of it's a little ahead of its time, certainly in terms of U.S. politics today. Yet, if some of the ideas I just presented seem politically impracticable today, just wait until tomorrow, because soon it's going to be clear to more and more people that it's business as usual, that's the utopian fantasy. And creating something very new and very different is the practical, pragmatic way forward. So my hope is that we can soon begin a sustained dialogue among liberals and environmental thinkers on the need for a common platform, on this issue of growth, and generally on the goal of progressive fusion. In the platform I just presented, I endeavored to find a way to support the goals that liberals see growth as supporting, notably job creation, while still accepting what I see as the underlying reality, namely that GDP growth in America today isn't delivering on its intended purpose, better human lives, and that it is, meanwhile, at the root of environmental losses and now emerging climate crisis. And I hope the liberal community will come to terms now with a large body of emerging environmental scholarship on this issue and do so before it's too late. I doubt that we will miss our growth fetish when we finally say goodbye to it. We've had tons of growth while wages stagnated, jobs fled our borders, life satisfaction flatlined, social capital eroded, poverty mounted, and environment declined. When you think about it, and this is very important, I think, the growth imperative is how we are controlled. The necessity for growth puts American politics in a straitjacket, a golden straitjacket, Tom Friedman would say, and it gives the real power to those who have the finance and the technology to deliver growth. Environmentalists, for their part, have got to abandon their silos also and do things like embrace the excellent social agenda laid out by Bob Reich in his book Aftershock. There he advocates a series of far-reaching and admirable measures to address America's vast social insecurity and income disparities. Personally, I find hope for real change, that real change is indeed possible. I find that hope in many places today. Progressive causes are turning to the task of building grassroots political strength. There's a proliferation across the American landscape of these new models of enterprise and community development and revitalization. There's a growing questioning of consumerist lifestyles, and people are clearly fed up with our failing politics. Then, there's also the birth of a series of new economy organizations and initiatives that are committed to linking these issues and to forging new strengths for systemic change. Among these initiatives are the New Economy Network, the New Economics Institute, the New Economy Working Group, the Third Millennium Economy Project, and the Capital Institute. Included here also are projects that seek to move America beyond consumerism and to dethrone GDP, efforts where groups like Demos and the Center for a New American Dream and numerous others are involved. And if you're interested, I encourage you to join with us in these efforts and help build the support these initiatives need. So, to conclude, let me pull this together a bit. What if the following occurred? Indeed, ask yourself if the following are occurring today. A decline in the legitimacy of the system as the system fails to deliver social and environmental well-being, together with a mounting sense of crisis and loss, both of these occurring at a time of wise leadership and accompanied by the articulation of a new American dream, a new narrative or story, and by the appearance around the country of new and appropriate models, and by the projection of a powerful set of new ideas and policy proposals confirming that the path to a better world does indeed exist. Where all these two come together, I think real change would be possible, and the prospects would be enhanced and advanced tremendously by the evolution of a new social movement, a powerful and inclusive one. All the progressive causes today face the same reality. We all live and work in a system of political economy that cares profoundly about profit and growth, and it cares about society and the natural world in which it operates, mainly to the extent that it's required by law to do so. And so it's up to us as citizens to inject values of justice and fairness and sustainability into this system. And government is the primary vehicle we have for accomplishing this. But mainly we fail today because our politics are too enfeebled, and government is more and more in the hands of powerful corporations and concentrations of great wealth. So our best hope for real change is the fusion of those concerned about environment and social justice and true democracy into one powerful progressive force. We have to recognize that we're all communities of shared fate. We rise and fall together, so we'd better get together. Thank you very much.